So I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Jim. I work for Scanning Pens. Some of you may have heard of Scanning Pens already, or you already have one of our pens. So please feel free at the end to ask me about that. But that's not what we're here today to talk about. What we're here to talk about today is about dyslexia and what to do about it and how we can help. And I'm really, really excited to introduce someone I got introduced only a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Helen Ross. So I'm really excited to introduce her and give you all a really nice insight into dyslexia, and we can hear about some of the research she's been doing and some of the training that she's doing. So I'm really excited about this. So everybody, there will be a recording available after this webinar. So I'll get that sent out to all of you tomorrow, hopefully by the end of the day, so you can share that with your colleagues or watch later on. So we'll be around 35-40 minutes for the webinar, and we'll give 5-10 minutes for questions. And feel free to put a question in the bottom in the chat box, and I'll monitor that for you. So I'll now pass over to Helen. There we go.
Hi everybody. There's a couple of people who I literally used to work with, so sending out much love and greetings to you guys. A colleague of mine from the Wiltshire Dyslexia Association, where I am chair, popped me over Jim's email address, and we've kind of organised this over the last few weeks, so it's been an absolute pleasure. I suppose a little bit about me. I have worked within special needs for, I don't even know how long, like 10 years or forever. It's written on a piece of paper somewhere. But over the last, since I came back from travelling after I got married, so since about 2012, I did my PhD looking at dyslexia and in people's experiences of it. I have spent a lot of time working in special needs provision, and then I became a SENCO for a couple of years. And then I decided to branch out a little bit by myself. So I dropped down from being a SENCO because I found it quite frustrating. I couldn't access all the things that I wanted to be able to access through no one's fault. It's just a really tricky system at the moment, and it kind of made me a bit angry. So I started doing more research into it than I'd already done. And doing the research I've done has taken me to presenting at APPGs. I've done a couple of presentations in collaboration with the British Dyslexia Association at all party parliamentary groups. I've been very lucky, and I've worked with John Hicks, who does a lot of work around parenting and dyslexia. He's an absolutely wonderful man. I do some research on climate change, which it's all out in the academic world, but it all uses the same principles as to kind of empowering young people and their families to tackle things that are difficult. And I've got an ongoing project at the moment that I'm looking at with Wiltshire Dyslexia, with Wiltshire Local Authority as well. So dyslexia friendly schools in and around Wiltshire. It's on hold. It's been quite tricky with coronavirus, but yeah, so at the moment I'm working 2 days a week in a mainstream school. I'm a special needs teacher, so I work with the kids that just find learning tricky. Some of them are dyslexic, some of them have varying other sort of neurodiversities and find learning tricky, and I absolutely love it. I love the work I do. I'm very, very lucky. This presentation is actually one that I share with my colleagues as well. So I spend a lot of time at school talking to the NQTs and the PGCE students about specific learning difficulties, mostly dyslexia, although dyscalculia is coming up. It's so difficult to say. And they're so difficult to spell, dyslexia and dyscalculia, which who knows? Who knows why? It's English, isn't it? So what is dyslexia and what do we want to do about it? Over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to kind of think about what dyslexia and specific learning difficulties are, how they manifest in the classroom, because it's not always obvious that somebody's got an underlying learning difficulty. Has specific learning difficulties. There are academic side effects, and there are social difficulties with it as well. And then what we can do about it in the classroom. Now, when I sent this PowerPoint over to Jim, it ticked all the kind of dyslexia friendly boxes. It was a sans serif font, and there wasn't sort of cursive writing all over it. I think somewhere when you switch programs, things change a little bit. So normally I would use a sans serif font. I'm just putting that caveat on what this looks like at the moment. So normally I would say, if you've got a post-it note, write your understanding of what dyslexia is, but we have a chat function. So have a little think for a moment what you understand dyslexia as being. And if you could pop that in the chat, that would be really, really helpful. And sort of think about how the concept of a specific learning difficulty is versus a general learning difficulty. And if you would pop your thoughts about that into the chat, that would be really cool. So I'll give you a minute for that. Okay, so this is a really interesting sort of understanding of dyslexia. What I am particularly interested, I mean, Itza Frith, she's just amazing in the world of dyslexia. She absolutely says it's a contested phenomenon. There is so many views of what it is. It's a very, very different set of manifestations for what is fundamentally a difficulty in processing sound and working out how sounds and letters fit together. David Tong he's addressed dyscalculia. It can be tricky with dealing with numbers. Now, one of the things that makes dyslexia specific is it's specific to phonological processing, phonological awareness, so dealing with sounds, chunking down words, rebuilding words back to when you come to spell them or when you come to read them. And that's where your difficulty is. Now, it looks quite complicated and it impedes reading. Reading then, if you find reading and writing tricky, it looks like you might not be clever, or it can look like that, but it's not. You've got a specific difficulty in accessing written word and producing your own written word as a sort of very general manifestation of dyslexia. And that's specific. You could have the best verbal capacity ever, but because of the way the education system is built at the moment, showing what you know can be quite tricky. So there are, as David Tong has addressed the ideas of kind of I've just realised I've spelled dyscalculia wrong. So David Tong has addressed dyscalculia. It's where your sense of number is really wobbly and you sort of working out how to count things without counting them one by one. Concepts of size, non-symbolic and symbolic magnitude of recognition of magnitude. So just working out how big things are, how many of things there are, is very, very difficult. Dyspraxia is where your sense of space within yourself is quite limited, and it can show in difficulties with fine motor skills, so handwriting, kind of things that use the tips of your fingers, and it can show in wider things where you're doing sport, or you might find sport tricky, catching balls, things like that. Dysgraphia, there's an argument that it's a branch of dyslexia. There's an argument that it's a branch of dyspraxia or developmental coordination disorder. At the moment, it's not formally defined. I've literally about a month ago been talking to the British Dyslexia Association, and as I understand, they are working on formalising it a bit more. One of the sort of around the sort of Venn diagram where all these different specific learning difficulties intersect, there are memory difficulties and processing difficulties. So memory difficulties manifest in difficulties with sequencing. It might be that your mental maths is very difficult. And where it hits spelling is if you find differentiating sounds tricky because your phonological awareness is wobbly, and if you've then got a wobbly working memory, holding the sounds, chunking them down, putting them in the right order and blending them back again is just very demanding. And if you're adding to that the kind of burden of having to write things, structure your ideas as well, that's where I'm addressing Joe McDonald kind of. So that's where, if you've got a whole lot of things that you've got to do and you're trying to produce your own ideas, organise your thoughts and get the spellings right, that's when something gives, and it can either be the amount of work that's produced or it's spelling quite often. So that's where that can be really difficult for people. I was hoping this video would work. Processing difficulties. This is the Charlie Brown series where the teacher sort of goes rah, 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 rah. And for some children, and I am one of those people where if it's not written as well and if I'm not actively listening, so doing something with what I am being told, you might as well be going meh, 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 because I just can't take it in. So in the classroom, processing difficulties can sort of look like somebody's drifting off, that they're not bothering to listen, but it's just that they might be listening, but there's so much going on that they're having to sort out all that information in their head, and it's just really demanding, and they might not be able to do it all. Or if you ask them a question, it takes them a while to get a handle on what you're asking, and then to pull their answer out and kind of work that the teacher or the person asking the question has sort of moved on, and the student might have actually been told off for not listening when they were just trying to think of an answer. It can also be that people don't know all information down because you're trying to work it out and then it's moved on. And it can be the same with following instructions and kind of asking for things to be repeated, because it takes just a bit more time for things to click and to kind of find their place in someone's mind. And the copying diagrams wrongly, I remember A-level physics, I loved it, but copying all the different force diagrams and the thumb rules, it was really hard. And that was from the board. So you're holding things in your mind, in your memory, you've got to process it, and then you're going, It's very, very demanding when you've got processing difficulties. And so what can we do about it? This is really actually quite straightforward for a teacher from a kind of teacher point of view. Bullet point instructions. Give people pictorial instructions. For younger children, have a now and next chart on their desk so they know whether it's for a task, whether it's for a lesson. And if you've got like a PowerPoint or a notebook presentation type thing, you can print it out so that kids can see what's next. I print out, I probably run up a horrendous budget on our printer because I print things out for kids so they've got it. And talk slowly. Don't chip straight in. It's very easy as teachers to ask a question, not get an answer straight away, so then re-ask the question. So then a student is trying to process the first thing and the second thing, and it's just a bit too much. And I think for me, copying from the board is one of my bugbears. Like, why? Just why? If you can print something, minimize the burden on spelling, working memory, processing information, because you're not having to read it to copy it. You're reading it to understand it. It just makes everybody's life so much easier, and it takes 2 seconds to go on the print button. It makes such sense, and it makes kids, well, it makes everybody's experience so much easier, because as a teacher, I'm not having to say, have you finished copying off the board yet, because it's in front of them. Sticking things in books is a different argument. I like files rather than books sometimes for that purpose. And also sometimes kids might need a bit more time, but they don't necessarily want you as a teacher checking in with them. So a colleague of mine years ago, when I used to teach in Barnsley, had a thing, the 3 before me, brain book buddy. So you'd have a think, try and work things out. If you weren't sure then, you'd look in your book. You'd talk to your buddy next door if you still weren't sure. And eventually you'd put your hand up and ask for the boss. I'm not a boss as a teacher, but actually the 3 Bs or the 4 Bs, depending on how you want to frame it, it just gives people a bit more time, and it gives them a roadmap to help themselves as well, because essentially we want our kids to be independent and to be able to just go with things and run with their learning as much as they can. Memory difficulties, they're not that far removed from processing difficulties. You might miss bits, you might take a little bit more time, or you might need to engage with things slightly differently. Now, it's quite manifest with reading and with copying. So where there's bigger chunks of writing, this is really, really clear. I know that I can read a whole wodge of stuff and only remember the first sentence of it. So it can be that when somebody's reading, when they're trying to do any subject, science, maths, whatever, they can only get certain bits of the sentence. So they're having to read it lots and lots of times to take in the information. One of the reasons I read aloud is because it's, for me, a lot more active. If I read aloud, I hear myself, so it's multisensory, and I'm working different bits of my brain. And so it's using slightly different parts of my memory. And that just makes life so much easier. And memory sort of impacts on, if you're struggling to kind of remember what's been read or remember what a question's asking you, well, how on earth do you organise your written work? Because you're still trying to get in your head what's going on and what you have to do. And for a lot of dyslexic people, it's even as much as finding the right words to use when speaking. I've assessed a couple of kids over the last few months. I do diagnostic assessments, and they know what the words mean on a vocabulary test, but they can't find the precise words that are needed within the rubric you've got to mark their answers. And that's really frustrating. It's really frustrating for them because they can't then show their knowledge. And if you're then finding the right words is tricky for speaking, finding the right words to speak and then write down, taking things out of long-term memory, it's excruciating for some people. And in maths and science, this can really manifest itself in understanding the question, knowing that certain keywords have certain meanings, knowing how to draw a forces diagram. That was my Achilles heel when I did maths. And eventually I gave up and I did zone out. And my A-level maths teacher was wonderful, but sometimes you have worked so hard, you've had enough. So what can we do about it? Extra time, chunk things down, planning support. So you can give people planning strategies. So things like post-it notes for writing down ideas, or saying, spill your brain out, spelling doesn't matter, we'll deal with that in a minute. You can let people record their answers verbally. So I think they're called talking tins. Primary schools use quite a lot, which is just lovely because you can talk to the tin. People use iPads. Over lockdown, a lot of kids were using mobile phones at our school to show what they'd done and then taking pictures and forwarding them to their teachers. And it's just a really nice way to do it. Classrooms where they have paragraph starters all over the world, all over the walls, sentence starters, things like that. Now, in my school, task planners, these are brilliant, and I've left their names in because they are the ones that devise these. They're sort of where a TA or a buddy might sit with a student who's finding it tricky, and they'll together talk through what you need to do for each bit of a task. And they're so powerful because if it's students working together, they together then plan their work and then they can get on with it. And they're just a really nice way to do it. And there's the good old mini whiteboard. I love a mini whiteboard because you can rub it out. And committing things to paper is scary. Scribbling on a mini whiteboard, scribbling on a mini whiteboard is brilliant fun. But writing a couple of ideas on a mini whiteboard, deciding you don't like it, no one has to see it again. It doesn't matter. Or you can move things around. You can number them really, really clearly, and it's a really nice way to do it. And with ICT, they're brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You can use things like a reader pen, a scanning pen. Our kids at school use them. We've got 10 of them at the moment, and the kids love them because ICT reader pens, whether it's a screen reader or a reader pen, it takes the burden off your memory for reading and processing the information yourself. And somebody's saying it to you, you can run it over and over again. You don't have to then read yourself. It makes life so much easier. If you're planning writing with ICT, whether it's bullet points or whether you kind of use something like Miro online or various kind of online, media that you've got for planning, mind map software, you can chop things, you can cut things, you can paste things, you can move it around. So you're not committed. Even when you've written a whole essay, you can still cut and paste, and you can save it in case it goes wrong. So it's just, it's little things that don't need to be really tricky, that can be done just to alleviate so much wobble and so much difficulty for kids. Reading difficulties. I cried in A-level maths because I couldn't read the question. Literally cried a lot because I kept losing my place. And I'd forget what I read, and it was horrendous. And it's so common. You will see so many kids that follow or people that follow the line. I do. I use my finger or a pen, something, so I don't lose my place. I'm generally not too shy about reading aloud. a lot of people are. Telling people to read aloud is not helpful. Offering people to volunteer is very different, and sometimes people will volunteer. You know, I had a class with some very, very dyslexic students, but they were amazing. They were so willing to read because they were brave, and they were amazing. Well, they still are amazing. But reading aloud is a real stumbling block for some people, and it's just, we want to minimize that worry for them. And even if you can read, you might be able to read mechanically, you know, decode the words and get through the text, but all your brain power's gone into reading it. You might not have taken in a word of what you said. And that's where it's very frustrating. And that's where actually reading aloud can slow somebody down, so that they have to read it properly. Sounds insulting, but read it more deeply, because you miss the key points. You don't take it in because there's just not brain space left for doing that. And proofreading of work is the bane of my life. It's the bane of so many people's lives. It's really hard. It's one of those things that we all, as a teacher, I tell kids, edit your work, read it through, make sure it makes sense. And I'm at times the biggest hypocrite, less so now because I've got more confident and I've got means of proofreading myself, but proofreading manually, there's no point me doing that, because I read what I think I wrote, not what I actually wrote. And again, so with proofreading, this is where it's really difficult for somebody with dyslexia, because they might not see their spellings are wrong because they wrote their spellings, or they don't know necessarily the different kinds of there, or the were, or the where. They don't, or they might not pick up on it, even if they know cognitively, and in a spelling test or a particular setting they can produce that. When it's their own written work, you read what you think you wrote, and it's really difficult. Proofreading is just really difficult. So what can we do in class? Reading rulers are wonderful. There are various companies that you can get them from. I quite often use Crossbow Education because I know them, and they're just dead reliable for deliveries and things. But if you haven't got those to hand, fingers, straight along line, really easy. Or just a normal ruler. It's to act as a guide as much as anything. And as a teacher, I'm very open with my kids, so they know that I'm dyslexic and that I really don't care for reading at all. I do it and it's important, but it's not my favourite thing in the world. So alongside reading rulers and using your finger as a guide, as a teacher, they see me do that as well, which I think sometimes is quite refreshing for them, because they also know I've got a PhD and that I use my finger to read. Somehow that makes them smile and makes them feel a bit more comfortable. And again, this is back minimizing reading aloud. If you've got someone who doesn't want to read aloud, the worst thing that you can do to them is say, now it's your turn. It just makes people clam up, and it's really stressful. And if you're going into a class stressed, you're not going to take in the information. You're not going to learn as effectively as you might in a setting where reading is optional. You can if you fancy, but you don't have to. Overlearning is a thing that it's a word I use a lot around supporting dyslexia. Pre-teaching, teaching, and post-teaching. So where keywords in questions like the difference between explain or describe or investigate, that keywords are so important. And in sciences, the technical words around various topics are so important. And because of the way exams are structured, the emphasis that's put on spelling means that if you don't know them, it can be such a barrier. Words, technical words in English, the linguistic devices, the play for screenplays and for stage plays, the devices around dramatic devices are so important for kids to have a handle on how to spell them, because sadly, if they spell it wrong, they will be heavily penalised. Again, whether that's right is a very different argument. I'll probably have it quite publicly at some point, I'm sure, but it's a difficult thing. And structured questions for younger children, if they've got something to answer that's got a couple of parts to it, they need to know, what do I do first, then second, then bit by bit guided questions, so that they kind of get funneled down the right way to answer things. As students go up school, it's really important that they then understand the nuances of how questions are phrased. Again, rightly or wrongly, that it's really, really significant, the differences in wording in questions in different subjects. I don't know sort of for history and geography, because I don't have that expertise, but I know in maths and English, describing, exploring, mentioning, explaining, they are so specific. So it goes as far as unpicking the question words first, and then once you've unpicked the question words, how do you go about doing each bit? And that in class, that can be done really quite straightforwardly. Print out sheets, have a prompt sheet, have a prompt on the whiteboard, and actually that would help all the class, because if they know what they need to do for different types of questions, you're helping your dyslexic students, but you're helping all of your students. Sorry, thirsty. Writing and spelling. Okay, dyslexia. People with dyslexia have notoriously bad handwriting. I'm sure the people that I used to work with here on this seminar would tell you my handwriting is terrible. There's a little bit on my wall that you can see. Well, you can't see it. You don't need to see it because it's horrendous. The mechanisms behind this are huge. It can be that sort of fine motor difficulties are associated with dyslexia. Whenever I assess, I run a sort of a couple of standardized tests that unpick whether writing is messy because of an underlying writing difficulty, or whether it's more to do with the cognitive load when you're writing, because writing involves an awful lot of effort from your mind. So kind of messy writing is a starting point, as it were. It's a common kind of assumption that people who are dyslexic have messy writing, and if someone's got messy writing, they might be dyslexic. Coupled with that is poor spelling. So poor spelling, and again, I sort of go back to what Joe McDonald addressed, where people can learn phonics and spelling's ready for a spelling test. And a boy I assessed the other day had this. He could spell when it was single word spelling. Soon as you are planning your ideas, you're structuring your sentences, you're thinking about punctuation, you've got a lot going on in your brain. The cognitive load on that is huge. Then you've got a word to spell. So you've got to decide which there you're going to use. 3 ways to spell that. And that assumes you know the rules and which one of them to use in whichever context. Add to the burden of remembering your ideas, holding your pen properly, getting everything in the right place at the right time. Your spelling goes. And unless the teacher said they're specifically focusing on spelling, your spelling will go. And again, disorganized writing, it's all part of this kind of mishmash that's going on in an individual's mind, that they might be focusing on spelling instead. So the spelling might be perfect, but the sentences might be really hard to follow, or the kind of organization of paragraphs if it's an older student, or people focus on getting all of it right but only write 4 lines. So it's with writing and spelling, the cognitive load is huge, because you are employing so many bits of your brain, and somebody is probably quite anxious and quite stressed if they're in a setting where they're doing writing, reading and written words. So it's really difficult. So what can we do about it? Alternative recording methods. So this can be videos, pictures. I'm a big fan of the storyboard as well for some students. It's brilliant. Storyboards and a couple of little bits of writing. Why on earth not? If it shows that somebody understands, why not? Technology. Now, reader pens can be great for this, because if they can read the answers, if they can read the questions that are being asked to kids, then kids they're processing less information themselves. And for some kids, the dictation software, there's various different flavors of dictation software. There's stuff in Windows, there's Dragon Dictate, which is, if I remember rightly, it is authorized by JCQ, because I don't think it needs the internet. I'd have to double check, but I think it's Dragon Dictate. For some people, a scribe really works, where you talk to somebody and they write down what you say. And when it's kind of note taking, give people gap filler exercises. You know, if you're worried that they're not going to engage if you give them everything on their notes, I mean, everyone knows their classes and they're different. So it might be that some kids, they need to actively engage with their listening. So a close activity, a gap filler, is brilliant. They've got most of the stuff, but they have to be paying attention to put the odd word in. And if the odd word spelling doesn't matter, it's not the end of the world. Or if spelling is a focus, you make that your focus. And part of that can be keywords as well. So it's where you really hammer home keywords, their meanings, their spellings. And that can be done as, say, pre and post teaching if you've got a school with capacity for TA support, or at home. You can use things like Quizlet, you can use things like physical cue cards, lots and lots of different ways to do it. And then again, support with proofreading. You know, if somebody has got something that's typed out, their computer can read it to them. If it's been printed out but it's typed text, you can use reader pens. Our kids do that. They find that easier. There are lots of different ways. But I think another thing, I haven't written it down on here because this is, I usually speak in secondary school context, but in a primary school context, I have worked as a SENCO in a primary school. And one thing I would say in that setting is, if you're marking work, don't focus on every spelling. I mean, you probably know this, but don't focus on every spelling that's wobbly. Pick a pattern. You know, if you've got 5 words that the children need to use in a writing activity, focus on the spelling of those 5 words, or focus on how they join a certain letter to another letter if they're working on cursive writing. But just choose and tell the kids what you're looking for. If they're not sure what you're looking for, they don't know what to focus on. So I think it's about being quite flexible with your marking policies and with the foci that you have in a certain setting for what you're working on with your children. Just going to have another drink, sorry. Social effects of dyslexia. Now, this actually came out of what I did with my PhD. So I have a few answers, but have a think about how dyslexia or a specific learning difficulty affects our kids that we work with socially. If you pop your thoughts in the chat, so I'll give you a moment and I'll have a bit more of a drink and then I'll see what comes up in the chat. Just reading what's coming out. So Jane says low self-esteem, Diane says confidence. Kim said, can't read Kim's last name. Kids say they're thick, low confidence, low self-esteem, high anxiety. Oh gosh, Gillian, yes, absolutely. Isolating, misunderstanding, embarrassed. It's really heartbreaking, isn't it? And they say they're not clever. Truancy. Yeah, well, they say it's I read a paper years ago and I can't remember who it was by, but it was kind of about the pathway from wobbly literacy to messing around in class to being really naughty to disruption to exclusion to a really rocky pathway down. It was really sad, really, really sad. And social effects are exactly that. Comparisons with other people. Like, I felt really thick at school. I felt really thick compared to my family because my family, they're amazing. They're overachievers. They're very, very clever. And I couldn't read for love nor money. My brother read The Lord of the Rings at about the age of 7. I'm like, no. So I felt really stupid, and I'm not stupid. Not everyone has the confidence and the obstreperousness to know that, especially when you're in school feeling really weak and wobbly and unempowered. So there's that. There's the kind of noticing you're different, noticing that academically you're behind your classmates. And then I think a few people have said Yeah, David has said that a student can't get his points over. Somebody else, Santhara said that a student had difficulty finding the right words. It's so true. If you're in a conversation and you're taking longer to process what's happening, it takes you longer to answer, by which time conversation's moved on. So you're just on the back foot with your friends the whole time, which means that you feel a bit isolated, you feel a bit wobbly. And one of the students that I work with my PhD, who's a quality, lovely lad, said that he liked to hang around. His best friend was dyslexic because they were the same. And so his sense of sort of identity, a sense of self was really strong, that he got an affinity with people who found the same things difficult. And actually that kind of ties in again to what Lisa says just now, difficulty expressing themselves, and Joe knowing they're working harder. These couple of lads worked hard, but they were on a par because they had some of the same difficulties. So it's a very isolating, very, very difficult experience. A lot of the children that come my way for assessment are starting to feel really, really wobbly. Mental health can be suffering or on the way to suffering, which is really sad. So I think oh gosh, yeah, Diane's just said somebody's despondent. It's just heartbreaking, isn't it? So I think one way we can support our learners is all my kids at school know I'm dyslexic. They make fun of my spelling and my writing, and I'm okay with that because, again, I'm confident enough. It doesn't matter. My writing is quite comical. But they also know I've got a PhD. They know enough about my life when I'm not in school, my kind of professional life, to know that I'm doing all right outside of school. They know that Richard Branson, he's not done badly, has he? He's quite a fairly well-off man. There are so many positive role models. So for me, it's about helping kids to reframe socially what their dyslexia means to them and what dyslexia means in the world. And with the British Dyslexia Association, we are so big on kind of positive framing of dyslexia to take away a stigma. Then I think we're halfway there. If support is not, Diane's just said, if the support's not there in school, it's very difficult to see positivity. Yeah, I get that. It's so frustrating. With my school teacher head on, yes, it's very difficult. One of the things that we look at is kind of pairing kids up so that they've got somebody who is in the same boat as them, but they can big each other up. But yes, it's not an easy thing. And I think this is where one of the things I'm quite passionate about is that every kid has tech. I looked at recently my phone's noisy. Uruguay, I read the other week, has, as of June 2020, every child in a state school in Uruguay had a computer, a laptop. It wouldn't be the best one, but it was one with apps, one that was suitable for school, and in schools they had internet access. Now, I think if we could make sure that every child has access to appropriate technology, be that a reading pen if that would suit them, be it a laptop, be it just a dictaphone, something that would help them access the written word. I'm a big fan of a computer, of a sort of laptopy, notebooky, Chromebooky type thing. Then I think it would remove a lot of the barriers to learning. I think we need to look at the curriculum and its expectations. The reading burden that kids have in the curriculum, I think, is unhelpful. I think the strong emphasis on memorization of facts rather than application of knowledge is tricky. And I think if we get these things right, there won't be the same level of emotional wobbles. Now, it's a mountain to climb, but I think it's doable. At least I'm going to argue about it and shout and make some noise. But yeah, it's really hard. It's a really difficult thing. But I think I've probably said what I would say. We've talked a little bit about some of the things that you can do. Have a little think for yourself. Made to do English, but not. Yes, Jane. Yes. Not allowed a reader. Yeah, this is where the reader pens are so good. It's why we're moving our kids as much as we can at school to a reader pen for that exact reason, so that they can use it in their English exams. So I think as well, what I'd like you to think about, you don't need to write these, but if you want to write your ideas for what you can take away from this in the chat, that's cool. But hopefully there's something that you can take back. Things like dyslexia friendly PowerPoints, things like just printing the sheets off, little things like that. Hopefully you can just take back to school or take back home, or to, to whoever you're engaging with around this. And hopefully it's something that's been useful. And I suppose, is there anything that you'd like to know? Is there anything that hasn't worked ever that I've suggested? Because for everything I say that's good, somebody will say, no, it's not. And that's really important dialogue to have. It's so important to have that dialogue of what doesn't work as well as what does work, because context, different experiences are all really important. So yeah, have a think. If there's any general questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and let me know if there's anything that's been useful. That'd be good. I'm just going to have a little squiz through the chat. Oh, is there any difference between print? Okay, so Jane Smith has just asked. Oh, hi, Jim. Jim's coming back. So Jane Smith has just asked me if there's any difference between printing landscape or portrait. I've heard landscape is better. I don't really know. Talk to the kids, I would say, with that. I don't know, in all honesty. It probably depends what you're printing as well. I would talk to the kids. Oh, thank you. I might be wrong. That's okay.
Helen, have you got any information for guys in terms of if they want to get in touch with you, like your Twitter or any contact information at all?
Yes, I will type my Twitter just now into the chat at Dr. Helen Ross. I'm just checking I'm spelling it right. And then my email for my .co.uk. Right, so I've put my Twitter handle and my email for work into there. There was something about, so the landscape, Jane McDonald says, your key tips for getting subject teachers on board with strategies to support dyslexics. Tell them how it will make their lives easier. Because if they're doing it, dyslexic kids are going to get better results. They're going to kick up less of a stink. They'll have a little tiny bit more work at the start, but I think less work as they go along, because they won't need to do break time chats as to re-explain tasks. They won't need to hammer kids for not doing their homework properly, because they've put the things in place so that problems will be avoided. So it might feel a bit more work, but it's kind of that invest to spend a bit to gain a bit kind of thing. Does that, I hope that makes sense. Caroline Folk. Hello, Caroline. Nice to hear you.
Caroline's here. Brilliant.
Caroline, coloured overlays. Coloured overlays. Oh, now this is a big thing. They can help. Visual stress is not necessarily the same as dyslexia. Some people who have dyslexia may have visual stress. Visual stress may be just what somebody has. So coloured overlays reduce the contrast. So between black on white text, which is why I use purple on my PowerPoints. Also, I like
I've had some comments. Your reading rulers, super useful.
Oh, reading rulers, I love, they're so good. And actually with the crossbow ones, their reading rulers are coloured. So what it does is it just reduces the contrast between black and white. I can't remember the details, but this visual stress is to do with how your eye processes light and dark. Brilliant. I can't remember the details, but it's not necessarily dyslexia, but they're really useful. And for some kids, it just fixes it. So that's
my wife, Helen, who said that. She's been watching.
Oh, hello.
Carla's come and watched from nice school one. Today.
You didn't say you were going to. Right, there was. Thank you, Claire. No problem. Strategies for inspiration. Is inspiration a software package, or is it Active Inspire from Promethean? I'm not quite sure what inspiration is, Isa. I'm really sorry. If you could give me a little detail then, but I don't know whether you mean to inspire people or if it's a
brilliant
app. Jane has said gaps between paragraphs help, or coloured paragraphs. Yes to both. Space is brilliant. Sans serif font, basically everything that isn't on my current PowerPoint. Fonts like Comic Sans or Calibri or Tahoma, I think, is like where they're round and they haven't got these little on the PowerPoint I've got, you've got the little kicky bits that kind of join the letters.
Verdana we've got here, Joe said.
Yeah, oh yeah, I like Verdana. I'm a Calibri girl, mainly because I can't bring myself to use Comic Sans. There's no rational reason for that. I just don't like Comic Sans. But yeah, they're really handy. So, and then, sorry, go on.
No, go on. I was just going to say that this recording is still available to everyone. So once we finish, we can send that out to everybody. And I was just going to mention, thank you so much for doing the webinar, Helen. It was really great to hear all about dyslexia and learn more about some hints and tips to help in the classroom and some of the technology. I know that you mentioned the reader pens. So just to make everybody aware, people who haven't got the pen, so the exam reader is JCQ approved. I know exams are cancelled this year, but if you are thinking for next year, you can use the pens with no access arrangements. So as long as it's part of your normal way of working, you can go in and use the orange exam reader across all GCSEs. So for all secondary sector, you can go in and use these pens. And if you're looking at your in-class assessments, you can also use our reader pen and exam reader for them. The reader pen is a fantastic tool as well, where you can actually lock it to the exam lock. So you can actually put in a PIN code, which basically turns it into the exam reader. So it locks off the dictionary mode, the dictaphone and the storage as well. So you can use that for the assessments in the classroom as well. I can see, Helen, you're getting a lot of questions. I know some people are saying the exam reader is a godsend.
Yeah, there's no rational reason why I don't like Comic Sans. I just don't like it. Just because I don't like it. If kids get on with it, use it. It's just me. It's me being weird. Quirky. Quirky. OneNote. OneNote is absolutely brilliant. I use that for my tutoring. And it's fantastic because it means we can go back and look at what we've done as well. So each of my tutor sessions is, one section of a notebook. It's so good. People like Clicker. We're looking at Clicker for school, and we are potentially looking at Claro as well. Claro is really good because it reads websites out. Yeah, so but the Comic Sans, sort of want to shrink into my chair now because I'm a wally about it.
I can get a copy of the chat if needed, guys. Yes, I can download it for you. No problem at all.
And I say, if you need anything off me, I'll type in my website as well. Helen.
Yeah, put all the information in, Helen. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, so
yeah, so that's my website as well, where it's got a contact form as well, and you can always just ping me a message on Twitter or like contact forms. I answer as soon as I can. Thursdays and Fridays I'm at school, so it kind of tends to be about 4 o'clock when I go and look at my messages.
If you can send me an email, Helen, with all that information to contact you, we can send it across to everybody who's signed up, so they can ask you any questions if they just think of something later on and they thought, oh, I should have asked you, and they've forgotten. So all the emails will go out to everyone who's registered, so there'll be the recording and all the contact information for Helen as well. So if anyone's got a question for her, if that's okay, Helen. So
I'm just writing it down on my to-do list. It exists.
Lots of questions. No problem. Any other questions, guys, at all? No problem, Joe. Love doing the webinars and bringing in new people and giving new ideas to people as well, and hints and tips for everybody in the classroom.
It's such a lively chat as well. It's really nice.
It is, yeah. So just to make everyone aware as well, and Helen, you're welcome to join as well. So tomorrow we actually have another webinar, which is done by another speaker called Samantha Garner, who's spoken at the TES show. You might know her, Helen. She's talking about the current in-class assessments and how we can support our SEN students this year for the summer assessments. And she'll be going through everything to do with access arrangements. So this is another webinar which is completely free, and it'll be at 3:15 tomorrow or 3:30. It's one or the other. And there's still spaces for everybody to join. So you are welcome to join, everybody, as well. And that's just on our website on Scanning Pens. So if you would like to join and learn a little bit more about access arrangements for the summer assessments, 3:15, thanks, Jane. Please feel free to join.